one of the things that's happened is we never want to ignore issues going on in our culture. We want to be relevant in the sense that you have questions, we have issues in our culture. We want to say, where is the church's voice? And so rather than be silent or risk an opportunity to speak into the challenges of our culture, we said, what if we just embrace some of what's going on and then say we're going to address it head on? What would God say? What would the voice of God say if we said, hey, there are racial issues that still exist in our culture? And one of the things that we could do was you could have the white guy stand up here and preach to you about why we should end racism, and I could give you some examples, which would be really silly. Instead, we said, what would it be like to invite a panel of people to come and share their experiences and walk them through some questions so that we can become educated and so that we as a congregation can say, I know people better. And so that's what we've done today. And so if you're on our panel, and I know you're kind of scattered out, if you'll come forward and have a seat here, I do want to give one more announcement as they're coming up, and then we'll take a moment and introduce them. On your worship menu, bulletin thingy, whatever you call it, there is an odd announcement at the very bottom, and it is for a funeral tomorrow. And so I want to give you this story so that you know why that's there and you know that you are indeed invited. So I got a call from the funeral home this week, and they say, hey, here's the story. This couple has been trying to have kids for 7 years. They finally had twins, and one of the twins died. Would you do the funeral? They don't have a church background. So I meet with the family yesterday, and we're talking, and I kind of... You know, it's one of those moments where God's kind of been speaking to you all week as you've been praying over this. And I finally, when we sat down, I was listening to the father, who also happens to be Aaron. He was speaking to me, telling me their story. And I said, is there any way we as a church can further support you or care for you? And he said, I just wish more people knew about Harold, that's the baby who died. I wish more people knew about his life. I wish more people would celebrate his life. And what God had been kind of whispering to me all week, and what Harold said, I went, oh, okay, I think I hear this. And so I tested it out with him. I said, Harold, let me just give you an option. What if we invited our church people to come to the service? You want more people just to be there and acknowledge that this little guy was alive and that he was of significance and value. If we as a church, by just showing up, can let you know you don't walk alone, and that we value all life. I said, would that be okay? I don't want to do anything awkward or weird. I don't want to do anything offensive. And so if you don't like it at all, just let me know. I said, but that would be a way we could speak into that. And he said, I would love that. Now, Aaron's a smart guy because he said, but hold on, let me check with my wife. I wouldn't have been that smart, okay? And so he called his wife, who's still in the hospital with the other twin, who's doing well. And Lucy's doing well, and she said that would mean a lot. And so I am inviting you to an awkward situation tomorrow. I'm inviting you to come to a funeral for someone you don't know, for a family you don't know, so that we can be the presence of God and remind them that they are not walking alone. Just claim that it's awkward, but claim that we can all grieve. Because we all value life, that this is a sacred moment in which we as a church get to rally around a family who has all kinds of questions and issues with the church. But we get to stand in the gap as the body of Christ and say, you are loved. And that little boy Harold was loved, and we will send him out as he's already in heaven. But we will send him off from this earth with a grand party and a group of people that gather around to say, he meant something. And so I'm inviting you to the funeral. It's at Belton Stroop Funeral Home, which is up near the high school tomorrow. It's at 6 p.m. And again, just show up and weep, mourn, celebrate with us, and declare that our God is the God who's got a bunch of babies in heaven. And I know that touches many of you because of your stories as well. And I thank you for this. I thank you that I don't have to wonder if some of you are going to show up. I know many of you will, and if you can't show up, it's no big deal. Be in prayer for us, but I just think that we have a congregation in which I can bring this to you, and everybody goes, yep, that's who we should be. we should be the church that shows up when there's a dad and mom that are worried that their little guy didn't mean much to the rest of the world. And we will show up as the body of Christ and say, he meant something to us. So, thank you. Thank you for being at church. I want to invite you to pray with me real quick before we begin this for that family. God, I give to you a broken family as we celebrate that Harold is already with you in heaven. God, we lift up to you his parents and his sister Lucy and ask for you to be with her and continue to make her strong. God, we pray that we as a church never say the wrong words, but rather we can be your presence by showing up. Lord Jesus, heal wounds. In your name we pray. Amen. 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 So we're going to take just a moment and let the panel introduce themselves. And we'll have to share some mics here, guys. And what I want to do is just give you the opportunity to just say, hey, this is who I am. And one of the things that's important before we begin this is just to get this out of the road. I don't represent every white Scotch-Irish person that you know. And neither do my friends up here represent every 80-year-old beautiful lady. And so forth and so on. So I think that's important because as we have a discussion, before we begin discussion, there is a danger to begin to go, that's how everybody who behaves, looks, thinks, whatever, acts. And I want to just make sure that that's clear. This is not representing the entire world up here, but instead this represents some of my friends and a special welcome to my boss, actually. Jocelyn Roper is my boss and Megan's boss, and she was very busy today and I actually didn't think we were going to make it, but so she's here and we welcome her as well. But we're going to let Claudette begin by introducing her wonderful self, and we'll just move down the line, and then we have some discussion questions we'll go forward with from there.
My name is Claudette Springle, and I've been attending this church for about 6 years now. I finally joined. And I'm glad to be here today.
My name is Jocelyn Roper. I'm the district superintendent for the Miami Valley District, which encompasses 8 districts and 144 churches. But more than that, I'm the mother of 5 children, the grandmother of 5, and that story touched me because I have a set of twins. So thank you for sharing that, Erin.
I'm Sydney King, and me and my husband, Alex, have been going here for about maybe 2 years. I've kind of lost track. It's all blended together. But I'm in charge of the greeter ministry. That's me standing out there, handing out programs, recruiting people to do that, and also helping lead the wagon ministry. So shameless plug, if you want to do that, just come say hi to me.
And what is the what is the wagon ministry? Is that an AA thing, or what are we doing?
The wagon ministry, you've probably seen it. Somebody is standing outside the door of the church, and we are offering wagon rides to the children to and from the door. They love it. So that's just an easy way to get into it, and then you don't have to really talk to anybody for that. You could just pull the wagon.
I'm Stephen. I speak for all Scott-Irish people. Aaron asked me to be on this just because he thought I could help facilitate conversation, but my main job is kind of to input where I can, or I think there can be clarification, and shut up and listen for the rest of the time.
Yeah. And of course, I'm Aaron. And one of the things that I do want to say before we begin, a special thank you to Sydney. Sydney leads our ministry in the greeters and does an amazing job of this. And we hired Sydney going, hey, this is our first African American that we're going to hire on staff, which we celebrated. But I want to make sure that this is clear, because we as a staff are not happy with how white we are. Now, I say that saying that we're okay with who we are, but we go, this doesn't represent Fairborn, and we think when we get to heaven that it's going to be all different colors, all different peoples, all different shapes and sizes. We want to look like that now. And a part of our intentional effort to say that we're going to move that direction is to say our staff should be diverse. Now, we didn't hire Sydney because she was black. We hired her because she is an amazing, wonderful person. And if you've gotten to know Sydney, you can't help but like see this infectious, beautiful smile, and you kind of go, I just want to hang out with you because you are so much fun. And of course, this is the first time I've seen you in weeks where you don't have artistic stuff all over your pants, which is, I was like all excited to see whatever you drew because she's an artist, a great artist, and an art teacher. And she brings so much just joy to whatever she does. But again, I just wanted to be able to introduce her and follow up by just saying that this is who she is. And I have gotten to know her and absolutely love her. Of course, Jocelyn is my boss as the district superintendent. And if you don't know the hierarchy of the Methodist Church, it means not a whole lot to you then. But I said to Jocelyn, is there anything you want me to say on the way in, introduce you? She goes, just tell them that we're friends. I went, okay, I can do that. So Jocelyn thinks we're friends, so that's good. She is my friend. In fact, I often tell people that you like me not because of me so much, but because you have a great relationship with my father. And I've been able to ride his coattails in, but I have absolutely loved working with you through the years and have great admiration for you. And Claudette is a wonderful person. She is one of the most just amazing ladies that you can get to know. She's, what did you say, you were 45 yesterday? Yeah. And she was bragging her age in the first service, and every time I look at her, I go, because you're go ahead. You're 82. 82, and I look at her and I think, there's no way you're 82. And so every time she reminds me how old she is, I'm just stunned. And she's got so much energy. She helps out in our clothing store and is part of several groups we have at the church. And so if you see her around, she's just buzzing around and doing a lot of really cool ministry stuff here. So I'm honored to be on the stage with you guys. So thank you for doing this. I know that at least for Claudette and Sydney, that they don't do this regularly. Like, they're not in front of people talking. And so I know that at least Sydney's very nervous, and Claudette's like, whatever. Like, what do you need? And so we're very excited that this is the panel we have up here. So let's start, and again, I apologize, we're going to hand the mics around a little bit, but how would you define racism?
They deferred to me, I think.
The boss, give her the mic.
Racism is the power to enforce prejudice, if you understand that. I think that's the best way. When I thought about it, that was the best way I could describe it. In other words, racism allows you to make rules that say some people are in and some people are out. And that power then swirls around things in a variety of ways, and many times we don't even recognize them. And I think that's the hard thing about racism or any of the isms that we talk about. It's that power to be able to make the rules and enforce the rules, and then have those rules have other byproducts that we never really think about. If I said to most white people, you have privilege, you would not know. You think, I don't have any privilege. But you do, because of who you are and how people judge you when they see you. Because of the years and years of things that have been seen by other people on television about African Americans, their understanding about the whole issue of slavery, those things give you privilege. And I even forget. I go to stores and I want to try on a leather coat, and somebody says, well, be sure and lock that up when I'm finished, or be sure you stand there with her. And I'm always amazed, even, that that's the character that people see when they see me.
I probably should have said something first because it's a lot shorter than that. My definition is to have any kind of pre-assumptions or any premeditated ideas in your head that you are superior to someone else just because they happen to be a different color than you.
What do people misunderstand about racism? I mean, Stephen and I talked about this. Stephen and I never wake up going, I'm a white guy. I'm going to have to deal with that today. And so what are some of the misunderstandings that happen? What are the misunderstandings about racism?
I guess one of the misunderstandings is that I've experienced some people that think that this is something that happened a long time ago, but like the civil rights movement and things like that, that only happened like decades ago. It didn't happen a century ago or a millennia. This was not even a lifetime ago. So it's still very recent, and there's still some people that are unfortunately still very backwards thinking about that. That's one misconception, I think.
I have an interesting job in that only 5 of the churches that I preside over are African American. The rest of them are white, and they're in a variety of settings. And when I show up at the door, people are wondering who is that person a lot of times, and they don't know how to respond to me. And I know that is the inherent nature of racism, the insidious nature of racism. Why is this black woman here? Now, I didn't wake up this morning thinking, I'm a black woman, I'm going to go, make somebody feel uncomfortable today. That's not what I got up thinking. I got up thinking, I'm a person, I'm one of God's children, and I'm going to church today at one of the churches in my district so I can celebrate with them. But oftentimes I'm viewed or not spoken to at all until the pastor comes to speak to me.
Wow.
I was told this morning that I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in an integrated neighborhood. I had Jewish friends, Italian friends, Puerto Rican friends, Mexican friends, everybody. We were all just one, so I'm not afraid of white people. And that I mentioned this morning that if I was, like, I wouldn't be sitting in the 9:30 service. So I just want everybody to know that I'm comfortable with you guys, and hopefully you are comfortable with me.
So Claudette in the 9:30 service made a joke about it, and she said, I walk in here and I'm just terrified of all of you. And if you hang out with Claudette, and sarcasm is like a second language, and it went over, everybody laughed, and then a couple minutes later, some lady in the front row finally raised her hand and goes, why are you scared of us? and Claudia just kind of looked at me, and I looked at her, and it was sarcasm, dear. Oh, I just felt so bad that she was afraid of us. And she keeps coming back. What a brave lady. Just a funny moment there. So help us out. Describe a time when you felt isolated or uncomfortable, and you walked in and just, hey, this is not right, I've been hurt or something because of your race or racism.
I told 2 stories. I'm just going to say one for sake of time. If you guys don't know, my husband is Alex King. He's up there, and in the sound booth, he helps out. So I'm in an interracial relationship. And this one time that happened, actually, the last election, presidential election, we were waiting in line to vote, and this one older gentleman in front of us started talking, I guess, to Alex, I think, about how he was talking about how it'd be funny to hang some of his friends from trees, and he kept enforcing that I'm not racist, I have black friends, I have Hispanic friends, I have all sorts of friends of different colors. But he just kept saying how he thought it'd be funny to hang all of his friends up in a tree to scare some people. And I'm standing right there. Alex is kind of standing in front of me, kind of trying to shield me a little bit, but he's also trying to enforce that I'm standing right here. I'm his wife. But this guy kept going, and he kept saying, like, these people can't take a joke, they don't really understand this. And then the conversation didn't really stop until he went to go cast his vote. And then that happened right here in Fairborn. We're at the little church on the hill, that's just where we were registered to vote. And that was one recent time that really kind of stuck with me that day.
Oh, I talked about the time when I got a job and my boss said to me that he'd never worked with a black person before, so he wanted to know if there was anything he could do that would make me comfortable, wouldn't offend me, and I told him there were just two things. One, don't tell me you have black friends, and the other one was don't tell me you like Sammy Davis Jr., because I don't.
That's the line right there, Sammy Davis
Right,
Jr.
I think the one that was the most painful to me, my children were attending a church in a United Methodist Church in Westerville, Ohio. And they changed pastors, and they really liked the pastor that left. So I knew the pastor that was going there, so I went to him, and I said, would you really reach out to my kids, because they're going to have a hard time, because they really like the pastor that left. Now, let me make clear, both pastors were white. Not one black one, one white one. That was not the scenario. Church is a majority white church. My grandchildren had gone to daycare there. I mean, they just had a great relationship with the folks in the Sunday school and everything. But I noticed that they were getting less frequent in church. So when the change came, I asked this pastor to reach out to him. And he said, your kids go to my church? And there was never a phone call. There was never anything. Now that was, you can do a lot of stuff to me, but I only want to fight you when you start messing with my children. Because then I have to remember that it's not over yet.
Yeah. So, I always just want to just pause and weep with you over that story. Like, it just, a little less in depth than that, but one of the questions that we often encounter, and again, I grew up with athletes, and I learned it. I am physically colorblind, but it's silly to say you're colorblind, but rather acknowledge that everybody's different, whether it's their color of skin or color of hair or color of eyes, or some people are short, some people are not, some people aren't quite as attractive as I am, and some are. It's okay. I mean, there's a few in the world, but and so I grew up in a world where we hung out with athletes and we had these discussions regularly, and some of them were appropriate and some of them were not. But one of the things that I always found interesting was some of the sensitivity or lack of sensitivity from all different sides. And one of the things that I always run into in our culture on the streets is that we live in what's called false peace. And that is that because I'm afraid to offend and I want to be politically correct, I don't ask the question or engage in a relationship that I should. So I don't want to hurt your feelings. And so instead of actually talking to you and acknowledging I'm not as smart as I want to be and I'm not as educated as I want to be, I just kind of bypass you and ignore you. So one of the things that I think is helpful, that is, again, just one of those intro questions that's easy, is what do you find appropriate, in the sense of, is it appropriate to say, hey, those are my black friends, or I'm a black person, again, she's African American, or there's not appropriate phrases? What is appropriate and not appropriate to say in regards to our brothers and sisters?
You can say black or African American. That's fine. You can't say colored, and you can't say the N-word.
And explain why, because I thought your explanation in the first service was great. So explain why.
Okay. Well, colored kind of goes back to before the Civil Rights Movement. There was it was an easier way for people to differentiate other people. If your skin had a color, you were colored. So that just brings back a long string of painful memories where we are considered less than or not important. So I have been called colored before, and that was very hurtful. Someone said to me I was the most beautiful colored girl he had ever met, and And it just kind of threw me for a whirlwind because no one had ever said that to me before. And I just was not sure how to react.
Well, the first time I went to Tennessee was the first time I really came across any kind of segregation or division, and you saw signs that said for colored only or white only, and that was really upsetting to me. But I was there when they opened the theaters to blacks, that you could actually go in and sit anywhere in the theater, not up in the top. And my husband and I had to take a car to get some work done, and we had several hours to kill, so we decided to go to the movies. And when I went up, he wouldn't go up. I went up to the window to buy the ticket. The lady wouldn't look at me, but she just showed me the tickets. And of course, when I went inside, I had to go to the bathroom, and there was a line, and people started moving away. And I said, fine, because I need to go to the bathroom. I went, and I figured, I'm going in after you. If you don't want to go in after me, that's your problem. And that's how I dealt with that.
And just, not that those issues are all solved, but what time frame would that have been?
That was in the 60s.
In the 60s? Okay.
Yeah,
So
the late
again,
60s.
I just wanted to reinforce the point that, hey, this wasn't like
this
centuries
isn't a lot.
ago. This was just right in our backyard.
Yeah, it was 60s, yeah.
Do you want to add?
I kind of forgot the question already. I was just gotten wrapped up in what they were saying.
Well, we use phrases to describe each other.
Yeah, I agree. I respond to African American. I respond to black. I do not respond to the other words. And I would echo what you're saying. But if you go back and look in the history books, you see that there is. The signs said no colored, no or no in folks here. We don't serve, and it's one of those two. So in many ways in the African American culture, those words are looked down upon. And it was, but there's, and I'll nuance that, because there are some folks for whom their age makes the difference in how they address you. And so when I pastored a white church and my 80-year-old said, we love colored people, I tried not to get offended, because I knew that was the culture that they had been raised in. Because making a big deal about that was not going to help them. What was going to help them was building a relationship with them and helping them understand that actually, it kind of got funny, because they would tell me about other colored people, and I'm like, do you know, don't you see who you're talking to? It just didn't occur to them somehow that I was their black pastor, that I was different. And I don't quite get that. I may have to ask you about that later. But there were things that they would say to me that I just didn't quite get, but it was almost as if, well, you're one of us, so we can say anything to you. And in a way, I was. But I realized quickly when people would tell me that, when I asked them what you want your church to be, they said homogeneous, and I said, does that mean white milk? I don't know. I understand homogenized, and I know what homogeneous means, but when I think of those words, that's what I hear or think of. Is that what you're saying to me? Because that's not the reality in this community, and that's not the reality even in your congregation, because there were African American members of that church before I went there. So it's layers. You got to peel this onion gently, because there are so many layers, and depending on age and depending on whatever. You said you were raised in the Bronx, didn't experience that. My mother was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and black kids weren't allowed to swim in a swimming pool in her high school. So, it just depends on, a lot of it depends on context and what you've experienced. Whereas In some places, the experience was very different. In other places, it was blatant so that people knew there were lines. But like you said, when you went to Tennessee, you didn't know. So when a lot of black people went south to go to college, because that was the place where most of the black colleges were, they got in trouble because they drank from the wrong drinking fountains or they sat in the wrong waiting room. So there's lots and lots of layers to this that if you don't know history, you lose all of the meaning. And I always try to be careful, and I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But I know racism exists, and it's a hard line to walk. So when do you confront and when do you let it go? And it's not an easy thing to decide.
So when we asked you to define racism, one of the things that came up in this service that we didn't have in first service was power and systems of power that allow people to decide what's okay and what's not okay. And now as we talked about what are some moments where you felt alienated or picked out or picked on because of your race, there were very personal experiences. How do we draw that line between power, which, it's very easy to say and want it to be done, okay, the power is gone, there are no laws against this, there are laws saying we have to treat all people of color fairly, and yet, so it's all personal now, so we do not bear responsibility because I'm obviously not racist. What can we do, or what is the relationship between those personal experiences and the power structures that still exist?
The reason why I used the power one that I did was because it was a church one, but I've also had that kind of discrimination, faced that kind of discrimination in my positions as I got to this position. When I was, several years ago, we changed our structure a bit, and they hired assistants to district superintendents, and I was the first one hired. I was hired in Ohio River Valley. And then I watched as every other district superintendent named theirs. And I knew immediately that I was the lowest paid person because I was the only black woman. And I'm not dumb. And the funny thing about us is, as clergy, they print our salaries in a book. So all I did was go look in the book, and every one of those white men was salary-wise ahead of me. So they had said that they didn't have to pay all of the assistants equally. And I was in one of the bigger districts with a lot of money and a lot of work to do. And so I knew just that I was at the low end of the pay scale. And I was right. And I did protest. And I talked to the folks in the district about it, and they tried to make it right. However, the bigger system never addressed it. And there is systemic racism and systemic sexism built into systems, and you can't get around that. If women are always at the low end of the pay scale, they're not going to get those high-paying $100,000 positions in our church. They're just not. Or if they do, it's one every now and then. Same thing with African Americans. You just don't see it. And when we do see it, we know it's God moving. Because it's not folks, because it hasn't happened before. It's just, again, it's layers. And when you say that one thing is this and one thing is that, there's not a way to specifically address it. The power issue, I think, even with, I was equal to the man I addressed, supposedly were clergy colleagues, but he chose to not, his recognition of me was, well, you're not as good as I am, so I know your kids can't go to my church. Because this is an affluent white church. So it's layers. It's so many things wound up and tied up together that if you're not aware of that, you could be fighting all the time. And I don't want to fight. I really want to get to a point where we don't have to fight. I want to ask questions. I want to be enlightened. Even that word is loaded. So how do we begin to have these frank conversations? A very difficult thing because it's so many things wrapped into one thing.
What's one thing that you would say, you know what, when I think of my history and my race, and not just my story, but my ancestors, that makes me most proud?
Claudette said this too, that we're resilient and strong, and we were able to take something completely hopeless with being turned into cattle, basically, and turn it into a culture that is beautiful, empowered, respected, and even imitated.
We're survivors.
When my baby girl, my twin, was born, she was very sick, and I talked to her doctor, who was I saw one day on TV. I didn't know that Miami Valley was rated that high in the nation. But he told me, he said, "Miss Roper, you won't have to worry. I've never seen an African-American girl lose a battle." That's pretty awesome, right?
What's one change that you think we could make as individuals or a society? I mean, there's, as you said, layers. I mean, there are all kinds of things that need to happen, but what's one thing that that we could all leave going, I'm going to do that better, I'm going to do that different, I'm going to think harder on this issue, again, either as an organization or as individuals within this congregation that you're addressing today?
We have to see each other as people, not as black, white, or short, fat, or anything else. Just as people. Just like you want people to think of you, you have to think of everybody else. And if we start doing that, I think we'd be way ahead of the game.
And if we really want to be part of the body of Christ and be like Him, then we have to embrace people who are different, because my mom said if everybody was the same color, it'd be boring.
Sydney, before you get there, explain to us, you were sharing, and I've heard you share this story several times. I love it. It's one of my favorite stories. So you're introducing your husband to your mom, who has never met or seen him, and he had to do the same thing. So explain that story to us, because as she talks about see each other as people, this is a great story for that.
Okay, well, Alex and I have been married for about 3 years now, and when we first started dating, we were in college, and then we just had to describe each other to our parents before we brought them home. And then my parents were like, well, oh, what does he look like? And I just paused for a minute. I was like, you know, I never actually really thought of that. He has blonde hair, blue eyes, really, that's it. And he had to do the same thing, too. It just kind of struck him that he'd never really considered that we were two different people or anything. We still have the same anatomy. We're both humans, and he just described me as I have brown hair, brown eyes, and black, I guess, because you can't see my pupils. But yeah, I think that's one of the easier ways to do it. Just talk to people as people, and we really just need to look past this.
In my own family, I have people that look white and those that are very, very dark. So I think we all get along. And a lot of them, if you didn't know that they were not, or they're Mexican, we've got some Mexican folks in too, we get along. It's family. I think the problem is those that want to isolate themselves from everybody else. I have one cousin that won't come around because he says every time he comes, and he's white, his feelings are hurt. And I thought, you ought to get a life. But I mean, you gotta, we get out every day and just deal with it. You won't come to a family reunion for a couple of days because it makes you uncomfortable. I don't understand that. I really don't understand that. And I don't even know how we've made him uncomfortable, because he won't say. So I think it's that kind of thing, if we really work together. But if you see somebody that's been isolated and you're Anglo and they're not, try to make some headway, try to find out why, if that person's feeling isolated. I think you've got to make the first step. Because even in places where I'm well known, a lot of times I'll be the only person sitting in a gathering. Because, and then somebody will come over and say, well, is this the black table? I mean, you don't see anybody else black, do you? I mean, I'm the only one sitting there. So, you know, it's just that when you see that other folks aren't, reach out and then ask your friends, why did you leave? You know her as well as we do. Why did you leave her out there by herself? Because sometimes we are alienated and we don't know why, but it happens.
Also, you can just say hi and just ask, too. That's what Alex and I do. Since we're an interracial couple, we deal with culture shock all the time. And we just ask each other. That's just it. It's just kind of simple as that. You can just ask. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I won't feel offended. You're trying to figure out something else that you don't know. So you just ask.
I tell a story that I heard yesterday. My granddaughter said that she walked up to a white young man at school and said hi, and his response to her was, I don't date black women. And she said, no. And she said, the black community thanks you.
I love it. I love it, man. I love it. Do I have a minute? Yeah.
Just to, I hate to hog this, but I think I'm like you. I'm old, so I have lots of experiences. When I was pastoring a white congregation, and this was one of the times I had to ask, when we were talking about how to change worship, in one of the services, they indicated they wanted an altar call. So I said, fine, I know how to do altar call. That's not a big deal for me. Black churches do altar calls all the time. You don't have an altar call, you haven't been to church. So that's not a problem. So every Sunday I would do this altar call, and there wouldn't be anybody at the altar but me. So after about 6 Sundays, I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. I need to find out what's going on. Because now we planned this, we talked about this, what's going on? So I said, folks, there's something happening that I'm not aware of, and you need to help me. What is going on here that I'm not understanding? Am I not doing it in a way that's invitational? When I say the altar is open for prayer, if you would like me to pray with you, if you'd like somebody to pray with you, we'll do that, or you can pray by yourself. What am I doing wrong? And the folks that had helped me plan this said, well, you know, if we come to the altar for prayer, people will think we have problems. I said, that's it? There's not more to it? Well, it's not kind of normal here, so if they'll think we really have problems if we come to the altar, so we're not coming. I said, well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? I wouldn't have been offended by it, but at least we would have been honest with each other. So don't do something because you think I expect that to happen. Do it because it's something you genuinely want or feel, and we can work on it together. I just felt abandoned almost because we had sat and talked about this, that this was something they wanted to add to the service. I wasn't trying to push that agenda. So I think that's what we're talking about, is that when you don't understand what's going on, you have to ask questions. And the answer may not be what you think, because I would have never guessed that Christian people would think that we're problem-free. But that was the ethos that had permeated that particular congregation.
Anybody else want to share anything? Well, thank you. Would you give them a big hand for being here with us? So I've asked if at the end of the service, again, I've just asked if you guys will hang out with us in the lobby and let people come by and give you high fives and hugs. I know you hate hugs, Claudette. Yeah. Claudette's a great hug giver, by the way, if you want a good hug. Come by and say thank you. And one of the things that every time I'm a part of a panel, and this is like the fourth or fifth one that I've done with this topic, the one thing that I always leave saying is, it's about a relationship. And once we get into the relationship, again, as you keep saying, you'll be short. And we can discriminate against short people, or we can discriminate against, again, we can pick all reasons why someone's other than us, or less than us, or different than us. But when you get into a relationship and you actually learn to care for each other, and that's why I just love your story about your husband, and just all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've never told you what he looks like, because that's less important than who he is. And I just love that story, and I think that's awesome. And again, as we move as a church, I hope that's how we handle situations. And I know that racial issues, as you shared about your story as a granddaughter, I mean, I talk to the teachers, I talk to coaches, I know that stuff's still alive, and I know we say stupid stuff out of ignorance and fear and uncomfortableness, but I just pray that we as a church are never afraid to address it. And don't settle for the false peace. Like, hey, this would be uncomfortable if I asked you, but therefore, I'm going to avoid the opportunity to be in a relationship because I might offend or I might say something wrong. But rather, let's just approach and let's love each other enough to push through false peace for the relationship that Jesus calls us to have with each other.
We ask our friends to heart.
Yeah. We're going to invite the band to come forward, and we're going to take up our offering. And then we're going to give you a blessing, and you can come out to the side of the stage and get to know these people and give them a big hug and handshake. Would you give everybody up here on the panel one more big hand clap and thank God for their presence? So one of the reasons that we had this discussion was because we believe the church, above all other organizations, above all other systems, above all other groups, should be leading the charge to say, look, we need to care for each other beyond our skin. We should acknowledge that we're different and celebrate that our God is a God of creativity who goes, look at all the differences that I have made. And so I thank you for being here this morning. I thank you for joining us online. And I pray that you go forth saying, we're going to have more discussions like this. I also hope that when you run into my boss outside that you lie and say that Megan and I are doing a good job. In the name of God the Father Almighty, who is the master of creativity, who has made us each unique, but called us to be part of the body that is His name and His presence in the world. May you go forth caring for each other in a way that people see Jesus in you. You are blessed. Amen.